There's a silver locket in the Vermont Historical Society archives that most researchers overlook. Inside are two photographs from 1875. On the left, a girl of perhaps 12, eyes downcast, hands folded. On the right, the same girl at 16, wearing a wedding dress, her expression blank as stone. The nameplate reads simply, Rachel, prepared and given. What that preparation entailed, what being given meant, remained hidden for over a century until the testimony of one woman would expose a systematic program of psychological manipulation. So methodical, so complete, that it destroyed the minds of dozens of young girls across 4 decades. This is the story of the Stillwater community in rural Vermont, where religious devotion masked something far darker. Where daughters weren't raised, they were manufactured, and where one girl's escape would finally tear down walls of silence that had stood since 1852. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. In the winter of 1852, a minister named Josiah Whitmore was expelled from the Congregationalist Church in Burlington, Vermont, for what his former congregation called dangerous theological innovations. Josiah had begun preaching that traditional marriage was corrupted by worldly influence, that true sacred union required what he termed proper preparation of the vessel. His sermons grew increasingly focused on the purity of young girls, on their malleability before corruption by society, on the divine duty to shape them into perfect wives before worldly knowledge could poison them. When the church elders demanded he cease these teachings, Josiah refused. When they threatened to remove him from his position, he gathered the 12 families who supported his vision and led them north into Vermont's wilderness. They purchased 400 acres of isolated land near Stillwater Creek, far from towns and prying eyes. They built a compound, a large central meeting house, smaller family dwellings arranged in a circle, and one building that would come to define the entire community: the Preparation House. The community's stated purpose was noble enough: to create a society based on biblical principles, to raise children according to God's design rather than society's corruption. But from the beginning, there was something unsettling in how Josiah Whitmore spoke about the young girls in his flock. In his founding document, later recovered during the 1889 investigation, he wrote, "A daughter is clay, formless and potential. By age 7, she must begin her shaping. By age 12, she must enter the kiln. By age 16, she must emerge hardened, perfect, ready to be given to the man God has chosen." No one questioned what entering the kiln meant. No one asked what preparation involved. The 12 founding families had placed their complete trust in Josiah's divine guidance. They would come to regret that trust, though for most, realization came far too late. The Preparation House was built in 1853. From the outside, it appeared benign, a 2-story wooden structure painted white, with flower boxes beneath the windows. But the interior revealed its true purpose. The ground floor contained a single large room with 10 small desks arranged in perfect rows. No decorations adorned the walls. No books were visible except for a single Bible on the teacher's desk. The second floor contained 10 small cells, each barely large enough for a narrow bed and a chamber pot. No windows, no decoration, nothing to distract from what Josiah called the work of becoming. When the first group of girls turned 7, 5 daughters from the founding families, they were removed from their parents' homes and brought to the Preparation House. Their mothers cried but did not protest. Their fathers nodded solemnly, believing they were fulfilling God's plan. The girls, Mary, Hannah, Abigail, Sarah, and Ruth, were told they were blessed, chosen, that they would learn to become what every woman should be: submissive, silent, obedient, and pure. What followed was 9 years of systematic psychological conditioning that would later be recognized as methodical abuse. The girls woke at 5 each morning to the sound of a bell. They dressed in identical gray dresses. They filed downstairs in complete silence. Speaking was forbidden except during designated instruction periods. They sat at their assigned desks and began their lessons. Josiah himself taught them. His curriculum had nothing to do with reading, arithmetic, or any conventional education. Instead, the girls learned the principles of proper womanhood, as outlined in Josiah's personally written text. Principle 1. A woman's mind is dangerous. Thoughts lead to questions. Questions lead to disobedience. Therefore, thinking must be replaced with reception. Principle 2. A woman's body is not her own. It belongs first to God, then to her father, then to her husband. To feel ownership of one's flesh is sinful pride. Principle 3. A woman's voice is a gift that must be carefully rationed. Speech should be minimal, soft, and only in response to questions from male authority. Principle 4. A woman's will is the root of all female sin. It must be identified, isolated, and eliminated. Each principle was taught through repetition, through exercises designed to break down individual thought and replace it with automatic obedience. The girls would sit for hours, forbidden to move, while Josiah read scripture and his own interpretations. If a girl shifted position, she was noted. If she made eye contact, she was corrected. If she spoke without permission, she was removed to the second floor. What happened in those upstairs cells was documented years later through testimony from survivors. The rooms were kept in complete darkness. A girl sent there for correction would remain in isolation for days, sometimes a week. Food was minimal. Bread and water passed through a slot in the door. No human contact, no stimulation, nothing but darkness and silence. The purpose, Josiah explained to the community, was to allow the girl to hear God's voice without distraction. In reality, it was sensory deprivation designed to break resistance and create desperate dependence on human contact, which would only be restored through complete submission. When a girl turned 16, if Josiah deemed her sufficiently prepared, she underwent the ritual of giving. The ceremony was conducted in the meeting house before the entire community. The girl, dressed in white, would stand before Josiah while he recited a litany of her training. This vessel has been emptied of self. This vessel has been filled with obedience. This vessel has been hardened through discipline. This vessel is now ready to receive her purpose. Then the man chosen to be her husband, always significantly older, always a member of the community approved by Josiah, would step forward. The girl's father would place her hand in the man's hand. Josiah would pronounce them married. No one asked the girl for consent. Consent wasn't a concept that applied to properly prepared vessels. The girl had been taught for 9 years that she had no will, no choice, no voice. She would accept her husband because she had been systematically conditioned to accept whatever authority dictated. The first 5 girls, Mary, Hannah, Abigail, Sarah, and Ruth, underwent the ritual of giving in 1862. They married men between the ages of 35 and 50. They moved into their husbands' homes. They began producing children. To outward observers, from the rare outside visitors who passed through, they appeared to be dutiful wives in a devout community. But those who lived in Stillwater knew something was wrong with the prepared daughters. They moved mechanically, as though their bodies operated on a set of predetermined instructions rather than spontaneous human impulse. They rarely spoke, and when they did, their voices carried a flat, affectless quality. Their eyes had a distant, absent quality, as though they were always looking at something no one else could see. Most disturbing was their complete lack of emotional response. When their children cried, the prepared daughters attended to physical needs with mechanical efficiency but showed no warmth, no instinctive maternal affection. When their husbands spoke to them, they responded with perfect obedience but no personality, no individual thought. Several of the non-prepared women in the community, mothers who had not been subjected to Josiah's program, attempted to befriend these young wives to draw them into normal social interaction. They described the experience as deeply unsettling. "It was like talking to a person-shaped shell," one woman later testified. Mary would smile when it seemed appropriate, nod at the right moments, but there was no one actually there. Whatever person she might have been had been completely erased. By 1865, 3 of the 5 prepared daughters had attempted suicide. Mary succeeded, found hanging in her barn by her husband. Hannah and Sarah were discovered before they died, but were immediately removed to what Josiah called restoration, returned to the preparation house, to those dark cells, until they could be corrected, back to proper obedience. The community accepted Josiah's explanation that these incidents were the result of insufficient preparation, of weakness that had survived the process. The solution, he declared, was more thorough conditioning. The program would be strengthened, extended, made more complete. No one questioned this. No one suggested that perhaps the program itself was the problem. By 1870, a second generation of girls entered the preparation house. These daughters of the founding families faced an even more refined system of psychological destruction. Josiah had spent the previous decade perfecting his methods, drawing on the failures of the first generation to create a more complete erasure of self. The new curriculum included additional techniques, enforced documentation of every thought, which the girls were required to write in journals that Josiah reviewed daily. Any thought classified as selfish, willful, or individual was met with correction. Hours in the dark cells. The girls learned to stop having thoughts that might be recorded as wrong. Eventually, they learned to stop thinking altogether, their minds becoming blank spaces that simply received instruction without processing or questioning. Another innovation was the mirror exercise. Each girl was required to sit before a mirror for 1 hour daily while Josiah stood behind her, listing her flaws, her sins, her fundamental unworthiness. The girl was not allowed to look away from her own reflection. The exercise was designed to create deep self-loathing, to ensure that the girl would believe herself fundamentally broken and in need of male guidance to have any value. The most insidious addition was the gratitude ritual. Every evening, each girl was required to stand and thank Josiah for correcting her, for saving her from the sinful creature she would have become without his intervention, for preparing her to serve her future husband. Girls who showed insufficient enthusiasm in their gratitude were sent upstairs. Girls learned to perform gratitude with convincing fervor, even as their souls died a little more each day. The second generation included a girl named Rachel Whitmore, Josiah's own granddaughter. Her mother, Abigail, was one of the original prepared daughters. Rachel entered the preparation house in 1870 at age 7. What made Rachel's case particularly significant was that someone was documenting her deterioration. Her father, Thomas, who had married Abigail in the first ritual of giving, had begun keeping a private journal expressing his growing horror at what his wife had become and his dread at seeing his daughter follow the same path. Thomas's journal, discovered in 1889 in a sealed box buried in his yard, provides the most detailed account of what the preparation process actually did to a young girl's mind. October 1870, Rachel was so bright, so curious. She asked questions about everything. Her laughter filled our home. Today, she entered the preparation house. She left crying. Abigail showed no emotion, said only that it was necessary, that Rachel would thank us when she emerged properly prepared. March 1871, visited Rachel today during the brief permitted family viewing. She sat perfectly still, hands folded, would not meet my eyes. When I asked how she was, she recited word for word, A passage from Josiah's Principles. When I asked what she'd had for breakfast, she said speaking of bodily needs was improper for a vessel in preparation. She is 8 years old. She should be playing, learning, being a child. Instead, she is being systematically destroyed. December 1873. Rachel no longer recognizes me as her father. She refers to me as the male authority figure assigned to my biological origin. She speaks in this formal, dead language Josiah has taught them. Her eyes are empty. My daughter is gone, replaced by this perfectly obedient, perfectly broken shell. By 1880, 23 girls had passed through the preparation house. Of these, 5 had committed suicide, 4 had suffered complete mental breakdowns requiring permanent institutionalization, and the remaining 14 had become the hollow, mechanical wives that the program intended. The community had grown to over 50 families, all adhering to Josiah's teachings, all sending their 7-year-old daughters to be prepared. But Thomas Whitmore had had enough. In the spring of 1880, when Rachel turned 17 and her ritual of giving was announced, Thomas made a decision that would destroy the community. He fled with Rachel in the night. They traveled to Burlington, where Thomas went directly to the county sheriff with his journal, with Rachel herself as evidence, and with a detailed accusation of systematic child abuse. The sheriff initially dismissed the claims. Religious communities were entitled to raise their children according to their beliefs. But Thomas was persistent. He brought Rachel before the sheriff and asked her to answer a simple question. "What is your name?" Rachel responded, "This vessel does not possess individual identity. This vessel exists to serve God through service to male authority." The sheriff's expression changed from irritation to horror. He asked Rachel other questions. Each answer came in the same flat, mechanized language. When he asked Rachel if she wanted to marry the man chosen for her, she responded, "Desire is sinful. This vessel has been emptied of want. This vessel accepts what authority provides." The sheriff ordered an investigation. Deputies were dispatched to Stillwater. What they found confirmed Thomas's testimony and revealed even more disturbing details. In the preparation house attic, investigators discovered Josiah's private records. Detailed notes on each girl's breaking process, including techniques for eliminating resistance, for crushing individual personality, for creating what he explicitly called perfect blank vessels. The documents revealed that Josiah had been refining his methods for nearly 30 years, treating the girls as experimental subjects in what he considered a scientific process of behavioral modification. Perhaps most damning were the failure reports, Josiah's analysis of the girls who had committed suicide or suffered breakdowns. Rather than expressing any remorse, he wrote clinically about what had gone wrong in their preparation, about insufficient isolation time or inadequate breaking of will. He classified their deaths as unfortunate waste of resources but valuable data for improving the process. The investigation expanded. Doctors were brought in to evaluate the prepared daughters. Their findings were unanimous and devastating. The young women showed signs of severe psychological trauma consistent with prolonged abuse. They exhibited symptoms now recognized as complex PTSD, emotional numbness, dissociation, learned helplessness, and profound damage to their sense of self and autonomy. Several had never developed normal adult personalities, their psychological growth arrested at age 7 when they entered the preparation house. Josiah Whitmore was arrested in June 1880 and charged with multiple counts of child endangerment and abuse. His trial became a sensation, drawing journalists from across New England. The prosecution presented Thomas's journal, the sheriff's testimony, medical evaluations, and most powerfully, the prepared daughters themselves. Rachel took the stand. The prosecutor asked her to describe a typical day in the preparation house. What followed was a monotone recitation of systematic psychological torture. Hours of forced stillness, days of isolation for minor infractions, constant messaging that she was worthless, broken, and in need of male authority to have any value. When asked how this made her feel, Rachel responded, "Oh, feeling is sinful. This vessel was taught not to feel." The courtroom fell silent. The prosecutor asked if Rachel understood that what had been done to her was wrong. Rachel looked confused, then said, "Wrong is defined by male authority. Josiah is male authority, therefore Josiah defines wrong." The prosecutor tried another approach. "Rachel, if you could go back to age 7 before entering the preparation house, what would you want?" For the first time, emotion flickered across Rachel's face. Her carefully constructed mask cracked. She began to tremble, then she whispered, "I would want to exist. I would want to be a person. I would want to be Rachel instead of this empty vessel they made." Then she collapsed, sobbing, the first genuine emotion she had displayed in 10 years. The courtroom erupted. Several jurors were visibly crying. The defense's argument that Josiah had been practicing his sincerely held religious beliefs crumbled in the face of Rachel's testimony. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Josiah Whitmore was found guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison, where he died in 1891, maintaining until the end that he had been doing God's work. But the guilty verdict couldn't undo the damage. The 23 prepared daughters faced a future none of them were equipped for. They had been raised not as people, but as objects. Helping them recover proved nearly impossible. Rachel, with Thomas's support, spent 5 years in therapeutic care learning basic skills of autonomous living, making decisions, expressing preferences, understanding that she was allowed to have thoughts and feelings. She made progress but never fully recovered. In an interview given in 1910 at age 47, she reflected, "I am grateful to my father for saving me. I have learned to exist as a person rather than a vessel. But what was done in those 9 years can never be completely undone. Part of me will always be that 7-year-old girl who was told she was too flawed to exist, who spent 9 years having herself systematically destroyed. I function. I survive. But I will never know who Rachel might have been if she had been allowed to simply grow up." Of the other 22 prepared daughters, outcomes varied. 5 committed suicide in the years following the trial. 4 remained institutionalized permanently, unable to function outside controlled environments. The remaining 13 attempted to build lives with varying degrees of success, all marked by the scars of their preparation. The Stillwater community dissolved after the trial. Families scattered, most changing their names to escape the stigma. The preparation house was torn down in 1882, but the land where it stood remained vacant, no one willing to build on ground that held such dark memories. The story should have ended there, but in 1923, during excavation for a new road, workers discovered a sealed metal box buried where the preparation house had stood. Inside were additional documents that revealed the systematic nature of Josiah's program extended beyond what the trial had uncovered. Among the papers was a training manual Josiah had written for future implementers of proper preparation, suggesting he had intended to spread his methods to other communities. The manual detailed specific techniques for breaking a child's will, for eliminating individual personality, for creating what he called perfect receptacles for male authority. The psychological tactics he described would later be recognized by experts as sophisticated methods of brainwashing and mind control, remarkably similar to techniques used by cults and totalitarian regimes. Also in the box were photographs, dozens of them. Girls at various stages of preparation. What made the photographs disturbing wasn't what they showed, but what they didn't show. As the girls aged from 7 to 16, their expressions became progressively blanker, their eyes emptier, their postures more rigidly controlled. The final photograph in each sequence showed the girl on her wedding day, dressed in white, and every single one had the same expression. Absolutely nothing. Perhaps most chilling was a letter Josiah had written but never sent, addressed to other like-minded ministers. In it, he outlined his vision for spreading the preparation system throughout America, claiming that society's problems stemmed from allowing women to develop autonomous identities and that his methods could solve the woman question by ensuring that all girls were properly emptied of self before reaching adulthood. The discovery of these documents in 1923 led to renewed interest in the Stillwater case. Researchers attempted to track down surviving prepared daughters. They found 7 still living, 6 refused to be interviewed, wanted nothing to do with revisiting that trauma. 1, now in her 60s, agreed to speak on condition of anonymity. Her testimony, recorded but kept sealed until 2005 due to her privacy concerns, provides the most harrowing insider account of what the preparation process actually felt like. People ask if we knew it was wrong. How could we know? From age 7, we were told that our thoughts were sinful, that questioning was evil, that our very existence was a flaw that needed to be corrected. We were children, we believed the adults, we believed we were being saved, not destroyed. The isolation cells were the worst. Utter darkness, complete silence, no sense of time passing. Your mind starts to fragment. You do anything, believe anything, become anything to be let out. And when they finally opened that door and Josiah stood there asking if you were ready to submit, you would agree to anything. Because the alternative was going back into that darkness. They didn't just teach us to obey, they taught us we didn't exist, that we were empty vessels waiting to be filled with purpose. By the time I was 12, I genuinely believed I had no self, no individual existence. I was a function, not a person. When I was given in marriage at 16, I felt nothing because I had been taught I was nothing. The trial saved me physically, I lived. But part of me is still in that preparation house, in that dark cell, waiting for someone to tell me I'm allowed to exist. Today, the Stillwater site is marked by a small memorial, erected in 1995 by the Vermont Historical Society. The plaque reads, "Here stood the Stillwater Preparation House, 1853-1882. 23 girls were subjected to systematic psychological abuse disguised as religious education. 5 died by suicide. We remember them not as vessels, but as the individual human beings they should have been allowed to become." The Stillwater case is now studied in psychology courses as an early documented example of systematic brainwashing and cult programming techniques. Josiah Whitmore's methods, while extreme, were not unique. Similar patterns of control, erasure of identity, and psychological manipulation have been identified in numerous religious groups, cults, and abusive systems throughout history and continuing into the present. What makes the Stillwater case particularly valuable for study is the extensive documentation. Between Thomas's journal, Josiah's own records, the trial testimony, and the later interviews with survivors, researchers have a rare, complete picture of how systematic psychological abuse operates and what long-term damage it inflicts. Modern cult experts note several patterns from Stillwater that appear repeatedly in destructive groups: isolation from outside influence, systematic destruction of individual identity, punishment for independent thought, replacement of personal will with group doctrine, and the use of that broken state to exploit victims. The survivor who gave testimony in 1923 said something that resonates with particular power. "The hardest part of recovery wasn't learning to think for myself. It was learning that I was allowed to exist at all, that I had value as a person rather than as a function. Josiah didn't just control us, he convinced us we were nothing without his control. That takes a lifetime to undo. Rachel Whitmore lived until 1931. She never married, never had children, devoted her life to working with young women escaping abusive situations. In her final interview before her death, she was asked what message she would want people to remember. Question authority that demands you erase yourself. Be suspicious of any system that tells you your thoughts are dangerous, your will is sinful. Your very existence is a flaw that needs correction. No person has the right to systematically destroy a child's mind and call it preparation, education, or love. What was done to us in the name of God was evil. And it continues today in different forms, in families, in groups, in systems that demand absolute obedience at the cost of individual humanity. Remember us. And when you see these patterns emerging, speak. Because our silence enabled our destruction. If this story has disturbed you, if you recognize these patterns in current systems or groups, if you know someone whose individuality is being systematically erased, understand that these dynamics don't require isolation in Vermont wilderness. They happen in families, in religious groups, in organizations that demand total submission. The core pattern remains the same, the systematic destruction of individual identity in the name of some higher purpose. The Stillwater daughters were sacrificed to Josiah Whitmore's twisted vision of female perfection. Their stories survive not as cautionary tales, but as documentation of what happens when authority goes unquestioned, when isolation enables abuse, and when systematic psychological destruction is mistaken for education or preparation. Some of them didn't survive. Those who did carried lifelong scars. All of them deserved better than to be treated as vessels to be emptied and filled according to another's design. Remember their names. Remember that behind every system of total control are individual human beings whose autonomy, whose very selves are being sacrificed. And remember that the first step in resistance is the simple but radical act of believing you have the right to exist as yourself, flawed and individual and human, rather than as someone else's definition of what you should be.